mostly because I wanted to, when I open a little bit about what we're going to go over tonight, I'll admit I want to kind of see your reactions collectively. So we're going to talk about Proverbs 31 tonight, not your usual men's study. I'm going to kind of split these up. Much I'll just pass them. I've got 30 copies, but I think we're a little over 30. That's right. So we may have to make a couple of copies, or you may have to try to look on with a neighbor. So, well, there we are. So when we start talking about Proverbs 31, obviously, we all know that our wives, the mothers, sisters, our sisters in the church, we know that they, I don't know, hold your hands up if you've seen it. I know my wife has at times. They can sometimes stress over this. This is like this listing of everything that they need to be living up to and all of this. And I got to reading in a commentary and a study about what the role is of the man and the husband. For some of you guys, it'll be future husbands. When we go through Proverbs 31. So I wanted to do that tonight. It's something a little different. The goal here is to be something where it's an encouragement. One, that it encourages you maybe to take some additional actions, and in ways that maybe you can encourage your spouse. Some of the things that we'll talk about tonight, and hopefully it will do that. To start, though, what I do want to do is actually read through it. So I'm going to ask for 3 readers. If someone will start and go from the opening there in 31, read verses 1 through 9. And then after that, if someone will take 10 through 21, and then the third person can take 22 through the end of the chapter. So if anybody has it, we appreciate you. Go ahead and start.
The words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him. What are you doing, my son? What are you doing, son of my womb? What are you doing, son of my vows? Do not give your strength to women, your ways to those who destroy kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to take strong drink, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed, and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. Give strong drink to the one who is perishing, and wine to those in bitter distress. Let them drink and forget their poverty, and remember their misery no more. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously. Defend the rights of the poor and needy.
An excellent wife who can find, she is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is the ships of the merchants. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she has planted a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchants is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff and her hands to the spindle. She opens her hands to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. How far do I go?
That's fine if you want to keep reading it all.
She delivers sashes from the merchants. Strength and dignity are her cloak, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her
thank you. So, really, I just want to step through this, and I want this to be kind of a dialogue discussion. I've notes here that I've taken down, but we're going to go through this and talk about how really this is something that we don't want to just ignore when we get to this last portion of Proverbs 31 and put the rest of the chapters of Proverbs as of importance, that these somehow are not. Because that's a misconception that this is just a to-do list or a check off for women of how well are you doing. Even though we know that they will stress over this. They try to really hold themselves to this, and you hear about it all the time, the Proverbs 31 woman. But I don't hardly ever hear about the Proverbs 31 husband. So let's talk through some of this, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of your thoughts and things on this. So the first question there was really, who is the proverb addressed to? Anybody?
Somebody's son, the proverb's son.
Proverb's son, right? This King Lemuel. Now, there's no record of who this is. There are speculations about who this particular person is. There is one that this is being translated as talking about the Oracle Massa, which is in the original Hebrew, as well as Melech, which means king, which means like king of Massa. We wouldn't know who that was. Another one that is mentioned is it could be talking about Hezekiah. I didn't really dive too deep into that one, but that was one of the thought processes there. It could also be that this is more of a idea of a fictional character, like an ideal. But I didn't really, not really something that spoke out to me. So the other one is that when you look at Lemuel, the meaning on that is belonging to God. And there is quite a bit of acceptance, I guess you would say, or thought process that this is actually somewhat of a pseudonym for Solomon himself. Son of my vows. That's a question. Any thoughts on what that could mean? When it talks about that. Son of my womb, son of my vows. Okay. Someone else had their hand up. Ben, was it you? Your thought?
Yeah, the follow through on the thought of the vows is that it's a legitimate son of my bloodline, son that holds my name. So, and she continues on to say, with my strength as well. So.
Okay. So we know it's coming there in Proverbs 31 that is coming from this mother, right? Going off of, and we're going to dive into a little bit of where that could have supporting argument. Like I said, this is not a absolutely definitive, but if it was Solomon here, then who's the mother? Bathsheba, right? Okay, so if you will, let's go over to 2 Samuel. I want to expand on this a little bit just to 2 Samuel in chapter 11. So this is the account where Daniel sees Bathsheba, or David, excuse me, sees Bathsheba on the rooftop. She's bathing, and then he goes about, where he lies with her, and she becomes pregnant, and then everything that starts happening after that, because he's trying to figure out how to remove Uriah. If someone will read for me in verse 26.
Now when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband.
Go ahead and add 27 as well.
When the time of mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife. Then she bore him a son. But the thing that David had done was evil in the sight of the Lord.
Okay, so we know that he's now, after Uriah is dead, he brings her in. He's now taken her as a wife. Who knows what happens to this son? Anyone remember? Get into chapter 12.
The son dies.
Yeah, the son dies, right? Following Nathan going to David, telling him this parable about the evil that he's done, trying to get him to recognize. And, he goes through that whole part. We all know he says, "You're the man." And at that point, David, if you look in 7, where he says, "You're the man," says the Lord God of Israel. "I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house, your master's wives into your keeping, and gave you the house of Israel and Judah." And it goes through and it goes on to tell him about what he has done. And in 13, what does David do? Verse 13. Chapter 12, sorry. We're on chapter 12. He confesses, yeah. He takes responsibility and he repents. He says, "I have sinned against the Lord." But what does Nathan still tell him? Is what Bobby mentioned too.
Kid's still gonna die.
The kid's going to die. But the Lord has also put away his sin. So he's accepted that repentance, but there's going to be a consequence. So after that happens, if we go on to look in verse 18 of chapter 12, someone will read that.
Then on the 7th day it came to pass that the child died. And the servants of David were afraid to tell him that the child was dead. For they said, "Indeed, while the child was alive, we spoke to him, and he would not heed our voice. How can we tell him that the child is dead? He may do some harm."
No, sorry, I said the wrong one. 24 and 25 is what I'm trying to get to.
Then David comforted Bathsheba's wife and went into her and lay with her. So she bore a son, and he called his name Solomon. Now the Lord loved him. And he sent word by the hand of Nathan the prophet. So he called his name Jedediah because of the Lord.
Okay, so this is where Solomon's born, and we know eventually, Solomon will become king. Called Jedediah. So I was looking into this as well. Jedediah, it's basically the same idea of what Lemuel is, being belonging to God, or devoted to God, is kind of along that same lines. So it's hard to say that would have any correspondence to say why would he refer to himself as Lemuel when we even know if he was going to have another name he was referring to, why he wouldn't use Jedediah if he was the one who was writing this and was referring to himself in Psalm or Proverbs 31. But I say, going off of this theory, if it was him, we know that Bathsheba would have been in a pretty perfect spot to be giving him advice about these things that was being warned of in Proverbs 31, right? She has seen this firsthand, what has happened, how it basically destroyed households. What happened? And so, if we look at it from that viewpoint, it would be interesting because what does Solomon go on to do? We know. Right? How many wives and concubines? 300 wives and 700 concubines, I think it was, if I have my numbers right. So it makes me think, was this written as a look back now for his son? I was even born, but I didn't follow through. And we know what he had to deal with as far as when he was a king and the things that he did. So, with Jedediah being beloved of God, and this, the same thing with the idea of Lemuel being an idea of belonging to God, there could be some similarities there that would lend credence to that this is being written by Solomon, and that the utterance of the mother is Bathsheba.
I don't know. My kids are looking at Proverbs 31. It's like a handbook. It's a set of instructions, and they apply to different people at different levels. Differently, right? Starts off with, if you're in a leadership position, here's the things that you need to be considering. Now, down at another level, here's the things that you need to be considering. And kind of by default, even though men aren't specifically spoken of there, it's kind of directing a man to understand what is expected of a woman. So there's certain things that men need to be aware of and nurturing towards and supportive of, and those kind of things. It's just it's like an instruction set, and it applies to different people at different. It would apply to me differently than it would apply to Sammy because I'm married and have a marriage relationship, and he's younger and single. Still applies to him, but differently. And I think it's just kind of laying those out, and they use two specific examples: leadership in a man type position, and then it went straight into the woman.
Any other thoughts? Okay, so when you look, or do you have one, Mike? Go ahead.
A little bit of a thought. I was looking through for any other examples or things that go with this, and it just was interesting. In 1 Kings 2, so Bathsheba went to the king Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah, and the king rose to meet her, bowed before her, and sat on his throne. Then he had a throne set for the king's mother, and she sat on his right. So she had a throne right next to his.
Yeah, and we even know of today in places that still have kings. I mean, there's a lot of emphasis placed on the queen mother. You hear about that quite a bit. But she would have held some prominence and would have probably had his ear, which is rightfully so. Gary.
It is interesting when you read the whole chapter. We tend to sometimes open it up and segment it at verse 10 on. But when you read it through, it's not that different from the advice that we would sit down and talk to our sons. The first part's about, how to be a man, a virtuous and good leader. And then it says, when you start to look for a wife, these are the characteristics you need to be looking for because it will serve you well. And if it's true, don't know whether this is, Solomon, but if so, that is a little ironic that he didn't make some of those good choices, later in his life. That came back to haunt him. It's the same thing that we would tell to our daughters, is look for a husband that's going to have these characteristics is what you need. It's the same concept, I think.
So I'm glad you mentioned that because that was the next step in the points, is that the framework there of Psalm 31, you start going in and say, okay, well, 1 through 9 is these instructions from the mother, and then sometimes there's this carryover as you go into the rest of the chapter that it's not kind of in the same style and it's different. So is this just an add-on? What exactly is this that's being said from this son who's reciting this? And as I started going through and looking at the Jewish custom of what they refer to in some of this, is that this would have been very similar to like the idea of a poem. And so if you look into it at all, it's called a, let me make sure I say this right, acrostics poem. And I didn't realize that Psalm 31 had this. I had heard of this and had understood some of this in Psalm. There's about 13 instances where this is happening in the Hebrew, where they put it into Scripture. So if you look at some of Psalms, you'll see this. And what that is basically where every line is beginning with part of the Hebrew alphabet. And so it progresses through the whole alphabet. And the idea was, one, for memory, for them to help memory key it, and for, to pass on. So it may have been something that his mother was something she recited to him, maybe from a young age, and that he is kind of putting that in there with some of this advice and the things that she would have told me, which is pretty interesting. In Psalm 119, there's an example of it, and it's actually, it goes through the Hebrew alphabet 8 times completely, and it's broken up in that manner, which I thought was pretty interesting when you go back and look at it and why it's there. So it very well may have just been him going back and remember this is something he probably had heard because of the idea. It was almost like this poem or something for them to remember, which I thought was pretty interesting. Any comments, anything before we move on to some questions? All right, so let's go actually into that portion where it starts talking about in this poem, if you want to call it that, that talks about some of the characteristics. We see some of the qualities of the wife, but what are some of the characteristics that actually will jump out at us if we're paying close attention when we go through this? So what's the one we see in Proverbs 31:10? Anybody thoughts?
So this man, or this husband, is someone who's got good eyes to see more than just what's on the outside. Definitely seeing the character and actions of the woman, so that he can identify this woman to marry.
Mm-hmm. And what about verse 10 specifically? We can draw something out of verse 10. Anybody? Chris?
I mean, I think that this man recognizes that the life that he wants is worth more than all the wealth he could ever possess. And so understanding the value of this woman, that he's also seeking her here. He's trying to find her. He's not waiting for her to walk up to his doorstep and knock and say, marry me. He's looking for her. And he understands the value of this woman he's looking for.
Right. And so what we're seeing here with this, talking about this value, Ruby, is that he treasures her. Okay? That we can do that when we have a wife who is virtuous. Do we treasure them in that way? Do we hold them in that high regard, Mike?
And I think this actually goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. Adam, it wasn't good for him to be alone.
Yes.
He had the entire world to himself, and God knew that man is not to be alone, and that's what this man is looking for. His Eve, somebody who is there, who is from his rib. This companion, this helpmeet, because that's going to be far more than the entire world of whatever is in there.
Yes, I want to read part of my notes there. Touched on that very thing, Proverbs 19:14. So I want to read that. It goes along with this first question.
In Psalm 12:4, it says the wife is the crown of her husband and brings him joy and brings him honor. So that's a wonderful thing.
Absolutely.
It says there.
Proverbs 14. House and wealth are an inheritance from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord.
So the idea is that he's going to see her value, especially if this was Solomon speaking. We all know Solomon had wealth. the Lord blessed him with wealth because he was so happy that that's not what he asked for when he said, "What do you want?" He said, "Wisdom." And the Lord was pleased by that and gave him abundance of wealth as well. But so that he treasures. And so that's what I want to kind of do is say, what are the things that we can do to help? Because we know our wives will stress over stuff like this. But what can we do to help reinforce for them when they are being these virtuous women? And I think it's important for us. I know it's especially is for me that I need to not just feel it, but actually to express it. And that can be hard at times. We don't do it like we should. What about the next one there on Proverbs 31 and verse 11? What's the characteristic for the husband there?
Trust in her.
Trust. Does that just means that you trust that she loves you and she's not going to go off with another man? Or is that in everything? Finances, raising children, all of these things I think it builds into it, and we'll eventually see all this. Eddie.
New King James says it's safely trust.
Yeah, that's what I have too.
So it's not a misplaced trust. It starts to get into some of these things. The first thing is about being able to recognize what truly is valuable. One of the cross references I have is from Ecclesiastes 7:28, where Solomon says, "Which my soul still seeks, but I cannot find. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found." So Solomon says, I can find one good man out of 1,000, but I can't even find one good woman out of 1,000. And that's a sad commentary.
Yeah.
But, he wasn't one who was really recognizing what true value is. And it's in those early stages before you ever even enter into marriage that you should be able to see that there's a trustworthiness that's there. And I believe first and foremost that trustworthiness is that she trusts in God more than she does a man. And I think that's why you can trust her so safely.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob?
I think I heard it touched on very subtly earlier, but I just want to emphasize from the previous study about this section that nothing is said about her physical features or attractiveness at all. I mean, it talks about her hands and her arms and all that, but contrary to today's world where it's all about physical appearance, what makes her valuable and what makes her worth what it is, nothing is said about her physical features.
Yes.
Right, yeah, so it goes into that too about your trusting. I do like that it says the heart of her husband trusts in her. There is a lot to, men, we have a lot of emotion. And we're putting a lot of trust into this other person to handle that. And to kind of be there and we can be ourselves. Because I think there can be a lot of times where you have two people that don't really know each other and don't really truly open up to each other. This is somebody, again, like going back again to Adam and Eve. This is supposed to be somebody from you. You should know each other intimately and you can trust each other. And that's the heart of her husband trust. That's the heart is what we're talking. It's the same heart that we're talking about trusting in God, right? It's your soul, it's your person.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Just one additional thing too. When you read this, it seems like it's trust from the woman, right? But we also need to remember that the woman understands that the man is the leader, and by this statement, I get that he's trusting and she's going to follow. And I think that in our world today, we have a lot of, and I'm not saying that women aren't part of the decision, but when the decision's made, and the man is the one that has to make that decision, the woman is behind him.
Yeah.
You probably, get what I'm saying, but it's just one of those that if we're going to marry someone, we need to marry a godly woman, because in the world today, women want something a little bit different in some cases. So.
Right. And that's what's, not to take us off too far, of course, but you start getting into talking about how hard it is with the idea of submission and what that means, and it's misconstrued of what that means. That doesn't mean that she has no voice with the husband or anything like that, but the idea that she is the helpmeet, that she is part of that process, and then the decision comes down to, okay, now that I've gathered your thoughts and your intelligence as well in this, and I now have to make a decision. Now, it may not be the one that she wants sometimes, and where the submission comes in, but the idea that he has that trust in her, that he trusts that she understands that he's not out for himself, and that he is looking out for her and the whole family, is all of that, but also with things that because we can't. If you've ever managed people or managed a big project and you think you want to do it all yourself because you can do it the best, it will bomb spectacularly.
You look at some of the translations, some of them use the word confidence, and one in particular, I think whatever it was amplified or something, just a word choice, and it gives the idea of a secure confidence. And just when I hear that, I think in the first 13 years of my marriage, I traveled 52 weeks a year, 5 days a week. And being able to not worry so much because you have someone that you have secure confidence, that they're taking the children to Bible class, they're studying memory verses with them when I can't be there. And that's what comes to my mind, is how valuable that is, that I can go do what I had to do and have secure confidence in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So the next set, when you get into verse 12 through about 22, starts talking about all of these things that she's doing. And what is important, as has been mentioned, that whether or not it be that it's the idea of the person you're looking for, but what is the husband to be able to say these things, or to attribute these things? What would you say that he is being in these verses, to be able to detail these out? It's kind of a trick question. It's hard. Chris?
I mean, he sees her. He notices her. He pays attention to what she's doing. Not just that, oh, she's my wife and she's a woman and she's over there doing house things. But he's observant of her so that he can see all the good works that she's doing, so that he can be treasuring her.
That's exactly what I put down. He's observant. He's seeing these qualities, seeing what she's doing, and that will just go on to reinforce the trust that he has in her and the value he places on her and treasuring her. But she's doing all these things, and it's not a secondary thing. He's actually knowing and it's taking notice or feeling that it's not you don't want it to be that it's important to her and you could care less. That if it's important to her and you see what she's doing, that you're observant to see what she's working on. Yeah, Derek.
Well, 12 really ties into 11 for me, as far as she does him good and not evil all the days of her life. And that's kind of what the confidence that he has in her. It doesn't mean that, she's not going to make mistakes in her business dealings or in the marketplace or anything like that. But at the end of the day, he knows that it's for his good.
Yes.
The intent behind it, Eddie likes to say, we should expect the best out of each other as Christians. Well, we should do that with our wives too. We should expect that what they're doing is for our good and not for our evil, and have that confidence and trust in them when they do it, and nurture that in them. Because we as men like to be fix-it men. If there's a problem, we're going to go fix it. Well, the wife is perfectly capable of handling some of these things herself. Doesn't need her husband there when she goes to the marketplace to hold her hand.
Yeah, the thought that comes to my mind is like a micromanage, like over the shoulder, nonstop.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about too. Even Moses, when he was trying to lead the people and judge their cases, he was spending all day long doing that. And his father-in-law would tell him, look, you're taking too much on yourself. You've got a lot of good men around you that can take care of this. Your wife is your helpmate. That's that's what she's there for, like you're talking about. He trusts her. He doesn't have to check up on her. He doesn't have to micromanage. You know, doesn't have her coming back and filling out a report every day of what she did and things like that. And there's been a lot of marriages that fall apart because sometimes we as men want to micromanage.
Yeah, yeah, one of the examples I was reading about, and I don't think I may have known one person, but I don't think so, if it was that level, but the idea that he needed to see exactly what she spent at the grocery store, and then would double check whether or not that was, like, I don't know how you have time to do that, like, you know, yeah, now if, you know, she shows, you know, the credit card comes in one day a month and it's an extra $2,000, okay, what's going on? You know, something like that, but it's this mindset of that, you know, she, like I said, to help me an idea that he can safely trust in her because she's in that same, hopefully you've had those conversations about what are we trying to do, where are we going, you know, things like even what we give to the church, those are all part of those conversations together that you know y'all are on the same page and know what we're working towards. And so, yeah, it definitely goes with part of that. Somebody had their hand up and put it down. Mike, go ahead.
Well, even a little bit more, I like the, you know, the observant, because the observant idea, but even more so that maybe that he's a cheerleader for this. Because there's words in here, again, I like looking at words, you know, we look at these, but like one of the ones here is verse 18. She senses that her gain is good. You know, she considers a field. She is not afraid of the snow for her household. So these are all words and phrases signifying to me that she has this confidence and that he's, you know, that he's providing that as well. Sure. That he's cheering her on. That considers the field and buy it. Great job. You know, not that we, you know, it has to be something like that, but it's a team effort kind of thing. And that, you know, as a team, we're cheering each other on for the wins and then consoling for anything that, yeah, that maybe we didn't get right today. That even if we do mess up, that it's, you know, and we're hoping that it comes back the same way too, because we're going to mess up too. That it's this back and forth that we're cheering each other on to do the best. And we'll be there for each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. The idea of it's almost cyclical. It goes into, you know, the more that, you know, and you're instilling confidence in her, and then she is, you know, in the same way, she'll continue to, you know, do him good. You know, that kind of thing builds and it grows stronger. Absolutely. Any other thoughts before we go to the next one? Eddie?
Yeah, but these aren't minor things.
No.
You know, a lot of times we safely trust our wife with the minor things, but, you know, she wants to drive my truck. She wants to play with my gun or use my golf clubs or something, you know, that's something else. But these are major things. And so when he talks about trusting her, it's talking about trust. It's not saying, okay, I'll let her do some things. It's I trust her.
Right. Yeah. Okay, let's go on to the next one then about verse 23. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. Now, I've seen this one where it's, my wife gives me a good reputation kind of idea. Like, oh yeah, you've got a good one kind of idea. Is there more there in your mind? You see anything else? This was just what I was looking at. Yes, that's important, and part of who she is and how she is will be a reflection on him.
The husband's deeds and actions are known. You're looking at he's not just hanging out with the guys too. It's with the elders of the land. So either I've never heard of you before. Who are you? What do you do? Or your deeds and actions speak for themselves, and I know exactly who you are.
Yeah, and this idea of sitting in the gates is almost I don't know if place of honor is the right way, but it's a distinguished type idea, you know, that sitting with these elders in this location area.
I wonder if it, you know, he's probably sitting there learning a lot and growing and improving on himself, and that leadership that he's of a growing culture and an improving culture likely carries over to her as well.
Yeah.
Kind of see, I've always seen this as it's like in the context of the woman, and he can sit in this position, and it's because of what she's done in his life. She's been all the surrounding verses talk about what she's done for their relationship, for their marriage, and thus he's who he is. And I know that's certainly the case in a good marriage, in a good Christian marriage, because the man does not stand alone.
I want to challenge it to expand on that. You're exactly where I'm at, but I want to expand on it. Ben?
We're just going to add to that and say that he also needs to be, on the other side of that, he needs to be something worth respecting.
There you go. That's where I was at too. That's his side of the equation. It doesn't do him any good if he's got this great wife if he's worthless, because they're going to know he has to be carrying his side of that equation. Derek?
Well, and you see that twofold relationship when you get into Timothy and Titus, and it talks about the qualifications of elders.
Right.
The men have to be a certain reputation. The wives have to be that way as well.
Right.
A wife can disqualify a man for being an elder.
Right. Yeah, and that's the we don't want to read this and just be like, well, she is my whole reputation. She is definitely a major part of it and can affect that. But if you haven't built a reputation to have in general, it almost doesn't matter what else is going on with it, because the single most person that can harness your reputation is you. And we even see that. You talk about the idea of the woman who has the unbelieving husband and can win him over just through her actions. Her reputation is still what it is, despite what he's going to do. And yes, though, she does build it. Sam.
The first time I read Proverbs 31, the first thing I highlighted was verse 23. I thought it was like a really big standard to live up to, because I took it pretty literally. But every time I read it over and over, now that we're reading it now, I get more of how does someone see her husband, his relationship with God? Is it invisible to other people?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. This is one of the verses that seems to speak most directly about it. You're not going to be a good leader if you can't find a good woman. It's going to be near to impossible. But because you have sought out the kind of woman that's going to help you be a leader, it gives you that place in the gates that God wants you to have as a leader. And, because he's trusted in his wife to make these decisions, it's helped the poor, the needy, his own family, his children, and he's gained a position of leadership because his wife is there doing what the wife is supposed to be doing. And he's allowed her those things. That's one of the problems with, I was saying a moment ago, with the micromanaging and trying to force people to do things. It doesn't work. It doesn't breed any kind of trust. And it's a horrible leadership style. But this man shows what real leadership is.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. I know we're already up against time, but in verse 28, her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. I think this is pretty straightforward. What is the attribute that he's doing here? Praising her. He lets her know. I trust in you. I see what you're doing. But I'm not just going to keep it a secret to myself and be like, oh, I'm glad about that. Like, that praise and that encouragement, again, we talked about the idea of that cyclical. That's good. It builds her up, just like we want to be built up, right? I know I do. It's those, some people have taken those love language tests or whatever, the idea of the words of affirmation kind of idea. That's important, even if it's not your your sole priority or your primary one, but to know that you're doing a good job. I mean, to at least know where you're at, to see that someone has not only seen me, but I know that they've seen me because they've told me. Right? Any thoughts?
I think it's important to note that praise is different than flattering. He doesn't flatter her, telling her, "Oh, you're such a good wife. You're really good at being a wife and doing wife things." Because he has seen her, he knows all the things that, like, no, here are all the things that you're good at. Here, you've helped the poor. You taking care of our home. Here are all the things that I've seen you do, and that praise is so much more impactful to her than flattery is.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, so the next one, verse 30. We kind of alluded to some of this earlier. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing to a woman who fears the Lord. She shall be praised. So obviously, and someone had mentioned it earlier, so I'm just going to kind of go back to it, is the idea that he's been insightful and wise enough from the get-go to be looking for these kind of attributes and to know a good wife is something from the Lord. And so not only do I need to look at it from the context of, no, this is just my spouse who serves me or something in that capacity, this is a gift from God. Am I treasuring it? Am I cultivating that relationship? Am I growing that relationship? Or do I use it as a means to an end? Kind of idea there. And so it's real important that I think that we also do that. And 31. Someone has an idea there, or your thoughts on what is the characteristic of the man there? What is his side of that role that he's doing?
It's allowing her to shine the way that she is. He's not trying to take the glory of her works for himself.
Right. Yeah, he's giving her the fruit of her hands, letting her take the credit. Maybe even let her take the financial, like, I've bought this piece of land and it's been valuable and I've made a good decision here, and now I'm going to do something with that. Whatever she's doing, with the work that she's doing, with the making of the clothing, things like that. So he's allowing her to take that credit and it not be just, we've all worked for companies at some point or another where sometimes the grunts do all the work and we know who gets the $40 million parachutes when they run it into the ground. Wow.
Just from a previous study, I was interested in the number of times her hands are referred to in this passage.
Absolutely.
This section, verse 13, verse 19, verse 21, verse 31. Talking about hands and accomplishing things and what we do with our abilities. It's not a minor point in this section.
Any other thoughts?
I'm not very good at complimenting Kayla directly, but I'm definitely not very good at complimenting her in front of other people, like telling others, giving her that fruit in front of others.
In the gates. Kind of like that, yeah. It's not easy for us sometimes because you don't want to necessarily come off as this braggadocious, but at the same time, it's worthwhile to give her that honor and praise because we're also not too averse to having a good joke with them every now and then when everyone's around about what she did the other day. So we have to be careful about that, right?
Kind of his comments about the hands. I mean, what's the saying? Those your idle hands, right?
Yes.
So it's like over and over talking about this. Like this is the opposite of that. This is somebody who's taking action and accomplishing things, and it's not being.
Right. Chris.
I think, and maybe this is coincidence or just speculation, but the gates that her works are raising her in, it's the same, that in the gates, that's where the husbands are supposed to be. It's where we're at, we're supposed to be sitting with the elders, and I think kind of let her works raise her in the gates. I think in a lot of ways that's us. we're part of her works and that she takes care of us.
Sure.
The same way that we take care of her. And so part of what we are to do is to be praising her for the work that she's done in caring for us.
Right. Yeah. Gary.
It's kind of building off what Chris just said. I think it's kind of what I see when you look at this. These things are living. They're not static. They're kind of symbiotic. The more she lives to that, the more the husband can safely trust her, or vice versa. The more he trusts her, the more she can do. And it's very similar to the relationships that God designed for all of us. The more I build you up, the more you're encouraged to build me up. These things just kind of lift, and it's kind of a mutual lifting together.
I liked your kind of your overall theme here, because this chapter is usually studied by women, not men. But obviously, the points that he made are well made, because it does apply to men. But one thing I was thinking about Shane's initial point of the perception of this different, maybe from an older person than a younger, and how important these concepts are for us to be teaching the younger ones, both the young men and the young women.
Yeah, I think it's very common when it talks about, we hear people talking about that, older women instructing the younger women and the girls, and this would be an easy go-to. This is, I think, probably the most common go-to. But I can't say that I've ever even thought about going to Proverbs 31 to talk to a young man, Sammy or somebody about, what is it you're looking, you might say, what is it you're looking for in a wife, that she needs to do all of this, but not from, these are going to be your responsibilities as well. We say, just look for this. Mike, go ahead.
When you read point 3, I'm not completely convinced this man is not an elder, and that what we really need to be coaching younger men to be looking for is women who fit these categories, because our goal should be that we're working towards becoming an elder. Whether we ever get to, we know there's many things that are going to potentially disqualify us from being there, but it doesn't mean that we don't strive to be.
Absolutely.
To be in that position. And all these qualities, a woman who is married to someone who wants to be an elder, if you're not doing even half of these things, you're probably going to disqualify a man from being an elder. So I think this is one of the things that maybe men need to study with younger men much more often.
Other Mike?
I know we didn't go over verse 29 about what the actual praise was, but I've always found it to be, and this is definitely, we see, this is a husband and wife that are older. They have children, so they've been together for a while, and he's still swinging for the fences. And I love that about this, that even as you go older and, up in years with your marriage, still date your wife. Still treat her as that first time you saw her and you were smitten. Swing for the fences.
Okay.
I think it's interesting that the book of Proverbs ends with this.
I do too.
That it starts with the father's advice to his son. And what better advice would we have for our sons than a virtuous woman and the wisdom of that in making a house, a home, and a godly home at the end of the day. I think that's a lot of wisdom that Solomon finds here at the end of the book.
Yeah, there's so much of Proverbs that would be something that we would go to when we were talking to a young man and trying to train about all the things to look out for and avoid. The idea, you see all of that part even with, the woman who whisper in your ear, they entice, things of that nature. And so I agree. It changed my thought process about the fact that it ends with this, and like that it is kind of this idea that it's almost a poem of we should maybe be reciting this similar thing to the boys that we're raising. Of not only is this who you're looking for, but this is how you treat them, and how you deal with them and work with them.
It is very different, especially from Proverbs 30, how it starts. Proverbs 30 verse 2 says, surely I am more stupid than any man. In Proverbs 31, you can be praised and gay if you find a good woman. So I think it speaks very well to the fact that you need a good helper.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else have a comment? Yeah.
One thing that stands out to me, looking at verse 10, where he talks about the work, the rules, the wealth. So what do we spend our time doing? We go to school, we learn a trade, we work our way up in the career field to gain wealth as humans, trying to gain wealth, be able to acquire these jewels. So he's comparing her to this wealth. It speaks to that importance of finding the correct woman, one that's going to help you with that.
Absolutely. And that there was a time investment there. Okay, before we close it out, if you'll turn with me over to 1 Peter. This was another just something that I thought about as I was kind of gathering my notes together. You know, Peter is writing here in chapter 3. We start seeing some of the instruction for wives and husbands. And so in chapter 3, it starts talking to the wives about being submissive to their husbands and the things that they need to do. And then you get to verse 7, it talks about that husbands likewise you can deal with them in an understanding way and giving them honor. And we break all of these things up because it's convenient for these to be in these chapters and separated. But it did not bypass me that immediately into verse 8, even though yours may have a new little section header for the verses, that he says, finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another, love as brothers, be tenderhearted, be courteous, not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you were called to this, that you may inherit a blessing. And I thought, to me, that was a good way of remembering it, that it's not just your wife also, it's your sister in the Lord's church. You know, and how are we supposed to treat each other? And it all ties in hand. And there's this extra special relationship we have because they're our wives. But it doesn't mean that they are not afforded the same graces and the same compassion and everything else that you would have on brethren. And you know, we can sometimes bypass that as well. So I thought that was, for me, it was something eye-opening. Any final thoughts, comments, anything before we wrap it up? Sorry, we're going a little past the 45 minutes. Okay, Brian, can I ask you to say a word of prayer for us to close, and then we'll do the thing? Thank you.
God our Father in heaven, we humbly approach your throne this time. Thank you for this opportunity we have to come together as men and study your word. We thank you for our wives, and we pray that you be with the young men who are looking to seek wives and be with them and strengthen them and help us to educate them and to be examples for them as we look to love our wives and cherish them and hold them up. Help us to be good husbands and good leaders in our homes, spiritual leaders, as we look to honor and praise you and live by your word. And thank you for this beautiful day that you've given us every breath you allow us to breathe. Please watch over us as we go home tonight and strengthen us as we finish up this week, and we pray that it is your will to come back together Sunday to praise and worship and honor you. And we thank you so much for your Son, Jesus, our Lord and Savior, who willingly died for us. Would you please forgive us of our sins? We love you so much, and it is in Christ's name that we pray. Amen.
Well, in the words of Charlie, shake hands and be friendly.